The courthouse stood like a fortress in the heart of downtown Boston, its granite columns catching the late morning light as crowds gathered outside. A heavy autumn wind rustled flags overhead, carrying the low hum of anticipation that always follows a trial of national interest. Reporters lined the marble steps, their cameras poised like watchful sentries. Some had been camped there since dawn, hoping for even the faintest sign of a headline before the day's proceedings began. Inside, the air was warmer, but no less charged. The smell of old wood and floor polish mixed with the faint, nervous perfume of too many people pressed into one space. The courtroom was a mosaic of tension, every bench filled with townspeople, journalists, and curious onlookers who had arrived early enough to secure a seat. Whispered conversations floated like restless ghosts, rising and falling in tiny waves until the sharp crack of the bailiff's voice cut through. "All rise." The audience stood as Judge Harrison entered. A tall man in his late 60s with a reputation for precision and a low tolerance for theatrics. He carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had seen every trick the law could offer. His black robe swayed slightly as he took his seat, his gavel coming down with a decisive thud. The sound silenced the room instantly. To the left of the judge's bench sat the prosecution team, 3 attorneys in crisp suits, their faces set in a confidence that bordered on smug. At the center of the defense table sat Michael Grant, a seasoned lawyer known for his cool demeanor and relentless preparation. But all eyes inevitably drifted to the woman beside him. Emily Parker, 28 years old, former financial analyst, accused architect of one of the most audacious frauds in recent memory. She sat perfectly still, hands folded neatly on the table, her back straight despite the heavy stares aimed at her from every corner of the room. Dressed in a simple navy dress and a cream blazer, she looked more like a young professor than a criminal defendant. Her chestnut brown hair was pulled back into a low knot, not a strand out of place. If she was nervous, she showed none of it. Reporters had written countless articles about Emily in the months since her arrest. Some portrayed her as a cunning manipulator who had siphoned millions from unsuspecting investors. Others painted her as a scapegoat, a young professional thrown to the wolves to cover for more powerful players. But in person, she was neither villain nor victim. She was simply unreadable. Her eyes, a sharp gray blue, seemed to take in everything without revealing a single thought. The clerk began to read the charges, each allegation rolling out like a drumbeat: conspiracy, wire fraud, falsifying financial records. Each word echoed through the courtroom, heavy with implication. Emily did not flinch. She kept her gaze fixed forward, breathing evenly, as though she were merely a spectator at her own trial. Michael Grant, her attorney, leaned slightly toward her and whispered something behind the cover of his hand. Emily nodded once, the smallest of acknowledgments. A reporter in the front row scribbled furiously, noting every micro-expression, but there was little to record. Emily offered no dramatic gestures, no visible cracks in her composure. Across the aisle, the lead prosecutor, Dana Whitmore, adjusted her papers with deliberate care. Dana was known for her aggressive style, methodical, unrelenting, and devastatingly persuasive. In her opening statement, she planned to paint Emily as a brilliant but cold strategist who had used her position at a financial firm to orchestrate a web of deceit. Dana had rehearsed her delivery countless times, perfecting each pause, each inflection. Judge Harrison surveyed the room before nodding to the prosecution. "Ms. Whitmore, you may proceed with your opening statement." Dana rose smoothly, her black heels clicking against the polished floor as she approached the jury box. 12 men and women, carefully selected after weeks of questioning, sat stiffly under her gaze. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Dana began, her voice firm but inviting, "you will hear evidence over the coming days that will leave you with only one possible conclusion: that the defendant, Emily Parker, knowingly and willfully deceived investors, falsified documents, and betrayed the trust of every person who believed in her. She paced slowly as she spoke, projecting confidence without haste. This was not a mistake. This was not an accident. This was a carefully constructed plan, designed to enrich herself at the expense of others. By the time you have heard the witnesses and examined the evidence, you will see that her guilt is undeniable. The words hung in the air like smoke. Members of the gallery exchanged uneasy glances, some nodding slightly as if already convinced. But Emily remained motionless. Her eyes followed Dana's movements with quiet precision, as if studying a chess opponent making the first move. Dana concluded her statement with a sharp look toward the defense table. "We trust that you, the jury, will deliver justice." Judge Harrison gave a curt nod. "Thank you, Ms. Whitmore. Mr. Grant, your opening statement." Michael Grant rose slowly, taking a measured step toward the jury. Where Dana's energy had been sharp and cutting, Michael's was calm and deliberate. His deep voice carried easily without the need for theatrics. "Good morning," he began, offering a polite nod to the jurors. "In the days ahead, you will hear many claims about my client. Some will sound convincing. Some will even sound damning. But sounding convincing is not the same as being true." He paused, letting the words settle before continuing. "This case is not about clever emails or complicated spreadsheets. It is about truth. And the truth, as you will come to see, is far different from the story the prosecution would have you believe. We will show that evidence was overlooked. We will show that witnesses have motives of their own. And we will show that Emily Parker is not the villain they claim she is." A faint murmur rippled through the spectators. Emily remained still, her gaze steady on the jury, as though silently reinforcing her lawyer's words. When Michael returned to his seat, the judge called for the first witness. The bailiff opened the side door, and a middle-aged man in a gray suit entered, his posture betraying a hint of reluctance. As he raised his right hand to be sworn in, Emily's eyes flickered, just for a moment, before returning to their calm, unreadable state. The prosecution began questioning the witness, presenting emails and financial records that appeared to implicate Emily. Each exhibit was carefully displayed on the courtroom screens for the jury to examine. Numbers, dates, and signatures filled the air like a storm of facts. Yet as the evidence mounted, a subtle shift began to take place. Some jurors leaned forward, scrutinizing details with growing uncertainty. Tiny inconsistencies, a missing timestamp, an unexplained transfer were beginning to emerge. Judge Harrison watched carefully, his expression neutral, but his sharp eyes missing nothing. He had presided over enough trials to recognize when a case, no matter how polished, carried hidden weaknesses. Through it all, Emily sat silent. Not once did she look at the witness, the jurors, or even her attorney. Instead, she stared at a fixed point on the wall behind the judge, as if her thoughts were miles away. It was this silence uncheckable, unbroken, that unsettled the room more than any outburst could have. By the time the morning session ended, the atmosphere felt heavier than when it began. The crowd filed out slowly, buzzing with speculation. Some whispered that Emily's composure was proof of guilt. Others wondered if it was the quiet confidence of someone who knew she would be vindicated. As the bailiff called for recess, Emily finally moved. She turned to Michael, whispered something inaudible, and allowed the faintest trace of a smile to touch her lips. It was gone in an instant, but it was enough to send a ripple through the defense table and an electric jolt through the watching reporters. Whatever was happening beneath Emily Parker's calm exterior, it was clear to anyone paying attention. This trial was not going to unfold the way anyone expected. The courthouse stood like a fortress in the heart of downtown Boston, its granite columns catching the late morning light as crowds gathered outside. A heavy autumn wind rustled flags overhead, carrying the low hum of anticipation that always follows a trial of national interest. Reporters lined the marble steps, their cameras poised like watchful sentries. Some had been camped there since dawn, hoping for even the faintest sign of a headline before the day's proceedings began. Inside, the air was warmer, but no less charged. The smell of old wood and floor polish mixed with the faint, nervous perfume of too many people pressed into one space. The courtroom was a mosaic of tension, every bench filled with townspeople, journalists, and curious onlookers who had arrived early enough to secure a seat. Whispered conversations floated like restless ghosts, rising and falling in tiny waves until the sharp crack of the bailiff's voice cut through. "All rise." The audience stood as Judge Harrison entered. A tall man in his late 60s with a reputation for precision and a low tolerance for theatrics. He carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had seen every trick the law could offer. His black robe swayed slightly as he took his seat, his gavel coming down with a decisive thud. The sound silenced the room instantly. To the left of the judge's bench sat the prosecution team, 3 attorneys in crisp suits, their faces set in a confidence that bordered on smug. At the center of the defense table sat Michael Grant, a seasoned lawyer known for his cool demeanor and relentless preparation. But all eyes inevitably drifted to the woman beside him. Emily Parker, 28 years old, former financial analyst, accused architect of one of the most audacious frauds in recent memory. She sat perfectly still, hands folded neatly on the table, her back straight despite the heavy stares aimed at her from every corner of the room. Dressed in a simple navy dress and a cream blazer, she looked more like a young professor than a criminal defendant. Her chestnut brown hair was pulled back into a low knot, not a strand out of place. If she was nervous, she showed none of it. Reporters had written countless articles about Emily in the months since her arrest. Some portrayed her as a cunning manipulator who had siphoned millions from unsuspecting investors. Others painted her as a scapegoat, a young professional thrown to the wolves to cover for more powerful players. But in person, she was neither villain nor victim. She was simply unreadable. Her eyes, a sharp gray blue, seemed to take in everything without revealing a single thought. The clerk began to read the charges, each allegation rolling out like a drumbeat: conspiracy, wire fraud, falsifying financial records. Each word echoed through the courtroom, heavy with implication. Emily did not flinch. She kept her gaze fixed forward, breathing evenly, as though she were merely a spectator at her own trial. Michael Grant, her attorney, leaned slightly toward her and whispered something behind the cover of his hand. Emily nodded once, the smallest of acknowledgments. A reporter in the front row scribbled furiously, noting every micro-expression, but there was little to record. Emily offered no dramatic gestures, no visible cracks in her composure. Across the aisle, the lead prosecutor, Dana Whitmore, adjusted her papers with deliberate care. Dana was known for her aggressive style, methodical, unrelenting, and devastatingly persuasive. In her opening statement, she planned to paint Emily as a brilliant but cold strategist who had used her position at a financial firm to orchestrate a web of deceit. Dana had rehearsed her delivery countless times, perfecting each pause, each inflection. Judge Harrison surveyed the room before nodding to the prosecution. "Ms. Whitmore, you may proceed with your opening statement." Dana rose smoothly, her black heels clicking against the polished floor as she approached the jury box. 12 men and women, carefully selected after weeks of questioning, sat stiffly under her gaze. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Dana began, her voice firm but inviting, "you will hear evidence over the coming days that will leave you with only one possible conclusion: that the defendant, Emily Parker, knowingly and willfully deceived investors, falsified documents, and betrayed the trust of every person who believed in her. She paced slowly as she spoke, projecting confidence without haste. This was not a mistake. This was not an accident. This was a carefully constructed plan, designed to enrich herself at the expense of others. By the time you have heard the witnesses and examined the evidence, you will see that her guilt is undeniable. The words hung in the air like smoke. Members of the gallery exchanged uneasy glances, some nodding slightly as if already convinced. But Emily remained motionless. Her eyes followed Dana's movements with quiet precision, as if studying a chess opponent making the first move. Dana concluded her statement with a sharp look toward the defense table. "We trust that you, the jury, will deliver justice." Judge Harrison gave a curt nod. "Thank you, Ms. Whitmore. Mr. Grant, your opening statement." Michael Grant rose slowly, taking a measured step toward the jury. Where Dana's energy had been sharp and cutting, Michael's was calm and deliberate. His deep voice carried easily without the need for theatrics. "Good morning," he began, offering a polite nod to the jurors. "In the days ahead, you will hear many claims about my client. Some will sound convincing. Some will even sound damning. But sounding convincing is not the same as being true." He paused, letting the words settle before continuing. "This case is not about clever emails or complicated spreadsheets. It is about truth. And the truth, as you will come to see, is far different from the story the prosecution would have you believe. We will show that evidence was overlooked. We will show that witnesses have motives of their own. And we will show that Emily Parker is not the villain they claim she is." A faint murmur rippled through the spectators. Emily remained still, her gaze steady on the jury, as though silently reinforcing her lawyer's words. When Michael returned to his seat, the judge called for the first witness. The bailiff opened the side door, and a middle-aged man in a gray suit entered, his posture betraying a hint of reluctance. As he raised his right hand to be sworn in, Emily's eyes flickered, just for a moment, before returning to their calm, unreadable state. The prosecution began questioning the witness, presenting emails and financial records that appeared to implicate Emily. Each exhibit was carefully displayed on the courtroom screens for the jury to examine. Numbers, dates, and signatures filled the air like a storm of facts. Yet as the evidence mounted, a subtle shift began to take place. Some jurors leaned forward, scrutinizing details with growing uncertainty. Tiny inconsistencies, a missing timestamp, an unexplained transfer were beginning to emerge. Judge Harrison watched carefully, his expression neutral, but his sharp eyes missing nothing. He had presided over enough trials to recognize when a case, no matter how polished, carried hidden weaknesses. Through it all, Emily sat silent. Not once did she look at the witness, the jurors, or even her attorney. Instead, she stared at a fixed point on the wall behind the judge, as if her thoughts were miles away. It was this silence uncheckable, unbroken, that unsettled the room more than any outburst could have. By the time the morning session ended, the atmosphere felt heavier than when it began. The crowd filed out slowly, buzzing with speculation. Some whispered that Emily's composure was proof of guilt. Others wondered if it was the quiet confidence of someone who knew she would be vindicated. As the bailiff called for recess, Emily finally moved. She turned to Michael, whispered something inaudible, and allowed the faintest trace of a smile to touch her lips. It was gone in an instant, but it was enough to send a ripple through the defense table and an electric jolt through the watching reporters. Whatever was happening beneath Emily Parker's calm exterior, it was clear to anyone paying attention. This trial was not going to unfold the way anyone expected. The third day of trial began beneath a sky the color of pewter. Outside the courthouse, the morning air was sharp and brisk, carrying the chatter of reporters already broadcasting live updates to viewers across the country. Inside, the marble hallways hummed with speculation. After 2 days of relentless prosecution, many expected Emily Parker's defense to finally take a stand. When the courtroom doors opened, the spectators surged forward to claim their seats. Jurors filed in with guarded expressions, their notebooks brimming with Donna Whitmore's evidence and accusations. Some wore the faint look of fatigue. Others, the wary curiosity of people waiting for a twist. At the defense table, Emily sat poised and silent as ever, her gray-blue eyes betraying neither fear nor frustration. Judge Harrison entered promptly at 9, his gavel striking like a gunshot. "Mr. Grant," he said, turning toward the defense, "you may begin your cross-examination of yesterday's witnesses, or call your first witness. The floor is yours." Michael Grant rose with deliberate calm. Tall and broad-shouldered, he projected the quiet confidence of a man who believed time was on his side. "Your Honor," he began, "the defense will first address the testimony presented yesterday." He stepped toward the witness stand where Martin Keegan, the senior accountant, waited once more. "Mr. Keegan," Michael said smoothly, "yesterday you testified that transfers were made to shell accounts allegedly controlled by my client. You based that conclusion on internal audit reports and the appearance of Ms. Parker's signature. Is that correct?" "Yes," Keegan replied, his voice steady but cautious. Michael clasped his hands behind his back. "You also admitted, under questioning, that you are not a handwriting expert. Would you agree that without expert analysis, a signature, no matter how convincing, could be forged?" Keegan hesitated. "Technically, yes, it's possible." Michael nodded, turning briefly toward the jury. "Possible. Thank you." He pivoted back to the witness. "You further testified that Miss Parker avoided your inquiries. Yet you also acknowledged that she suggested the company's accounting system might have been compromised. Did you investigate that possibility before accusing her?" Keegan's brow furrowed. "I reported the irregularities to my superiors." "It wasn't my role to please answer the question," Michael said gently but firmly. "No," Keegan admitted. Michael allowed a beat of silence to settle before thanking the witness and returning to the defense table. The jurors scribbled notes, some exchanging quick glances. Next came Rachel Lynn, the IT specialist whose testimony about server logs had seemed so damning the day before. Michael approached with a faint smile that carried neither warmth nor malice. "Ms. Lynn," he began, "you testified that suspicious logins occurred using credentials assigned to my client. Are you aware of any prior security breaches at Parker and Cole?" Rachel blinked. "There were occasional phishing attempts, but nothing major." "Nothing major that you were officially told about," Michael clarified. "But can you absolutely rule out that someone else could have used Miss Parker's credentials?" Rachel hesitated. "We can't rule it out completely. But the system showed her ID and password. Passwords can be stolen, can they not?" "Yes." "IP addresses can be masked?" "Yes." "Logs can be spoofed?" Rachel's shoulders sagged slightly. "Yes." Michael offered a courteous nod. "Thank you, Ms. Lynn. No further questions." A ripple of uncertainty spread across the jury box. Dana Whitmore stiffened, her jaw tightening as Michael's calm dismantling of her witnesses began to erode the neat narrative she had constructed. Judge Harrison glanced at the clock. "Mr. Grant, you may call your next witness." "The defense calls Dr. Samuel Price," Michael announced. A distinguished man in his early 50s approached the stand. Introduced as a nationally recognized forensic document analyst, Dr. Price explained his credentials with crisp precision. Michael handed him enlarged copies of the authorization forms bearing Emily's signature. "Dr. Price," Michael said, "you conducted a full analysis of these signatures. What did you find?" Price adjusted his glasses. "I found several anomalies, pressure patterns and pen lifts inconsistent with known samples of Miss Parker's handwriting. In my professional opinion, these signatures are not genuine." The jury leaned forward. Even Judge Harrison's normally impassive expression flickered. Dana shot to her feet. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is speculating." "Overruled," Harrison said. "The witness may state his expert opinion." Michael allowed the words to linger in the silent room before thanking the expert and returning to his seat. From the gallery came the faint scratch of pens, the low hiss of whispered speculation. Reporters exchanged looks that said everything. The defense had drawn blood. During the lunch recess, journalists flooded the courthouse steps, broadcasting urgent updates. Headlines across social media shifted from "Prosecution tightens noose" to "Defense finds cracks in case against Parker." When court resumed, Michael called his second expert, cybersecurity consultant Nadia Brooks, a sharp-witted specialist with a reputation for exposing corporate breaches. Nadia testified that Parker and Cole's internal network had suffered a series of unreported intrusions in the months preceding the alleged fraud. These intrusions, she explained, could allow an attacker to plant false transactions or reroute funds while leaving an innocent employee's credentials as the apparent source. Dana objected repeatedly, but Judge Harrison overruled each challenge. The jurors watched Nadia's technical demonstration with rapt attention as she showed how digital evidence could be manipulated to mimic Emily's electronic signature. By mid-afternoon, the energy in the courtroom had shifted. The airtight case Dinah presented over the first 2 days now resembled a patchwork of possibilities. Jurors whispered to one another during breaks, their earlier certainty melting into doubt. Through it all, Emily remained the eye of the storm. She sat gracefully, her hands resting lightly on the table, her gaze moving calmly between witnesses and jurors. Once, during a brief pause in testimony, she turned to Michael and murmured something that made him glance sharply toward the prosecution table before offering a barely perceptible nod. The defense's final witness of the day was not an expert, but a former junior analyst named Clara Monroe, who had worked under Emily during the period in question. Clara, nervous but resolute, testified that internal politics at Parker and Cole were cutthroat, with rival teams vying for lucrative accounts and promotions. "Did Ms. Parker ever pressure you to falsify documents or conceal transfers?" Michael asked. "No," Clara said firmly. "In fact, she was the one who warned us about irregularities in the system. She told me to double-check everything and report anything suspicious." Dana's cross-examination was swift, but ineffective. Clara's quiet sincerity held. By the time Judge Harrison called for adjournment, the atmosphere was electric. Spectators filed out buzzing with speculation. Outside, news outlets scrambled to rewrite their narratives yet again. Michael gathered his papers with measured efficiency. "Strong day," he murmured to Emily as the bailiff escorted them toward the exit. Emily allowed the faintest smile. "They're starting to see it," she said softly. Michael studied her for a long moment. There was something in her tone, an edge of certainty, almost of triumph, that sent a chill through him. Emily was not merely confident in her innocence. She seemed to know exactly how the next moves would unfold, as though the trial were a chess match she had already played in her mind. That night, as the courthouse emptied and cameras packed away, whispers of doubt spread across the city. What if the prosecution's mountain of evidence was nothing more than an elaborate mirage? What if the quiet young woman at the center of it all was not the criminal, but the key to exposing something far larger? Inside a modest hotel room a few blocks away, Emily reviewed the day's testimony alone. She moved with the same controlled precision she had shown in court, arranging her notes, marking small details, and occasionally pausing to stare out at the darkened skyline. Somewhere behind those calm gray-blue eyes, a plan was unfolding, one that would soon force everyone, including Judge Harrison, to question everything they thought they knew. The fourth morning of the trial dawned cold and gray, a thin mist clinging to the courthouse steps. Despite the weather, the crowd outside had swelled overnight. Reporters jockeyed for position, cameras ready, each hoping for the next headline that might tilt public opinion one way or the other. Inside, the courtroom buzzed like a hive. Everyone sensed that today would bring a shift, though none could have predicted how dramatic that shift would be. Emily Parker arrived early, escorted by her attorney, Michael Grant. She wore a charcoal gray suit, her hair pulled into a simple knot. Her face remained a mask of calm, but her eyes flickered with an intensity that drew every gaze in the room. Michael noticed it too. "You're unusually focused today," he murmured as they took their seats. Emily gave the faintest nod. "Something's coming." A judge entered promptly at 9. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced, his voice echoing through the high-ceilinged chamber. Judge Harrison settled into his chair, scanning the room with his usual measured authority. "Ms. Whitmore," he said to the prosecutor, "you may proceed." Dana Whitmore rose with a sharpness that immediately silenced the gallery. Over the past 3 days, the defense had chipped away at her case, but she remained determined. Today, she had a weapon the defense could not have anticipated. "Your Honor," Dana began, her voice carrying a quiet edge, "the prosecution calls a previously undisclosed witness, Mr. Alex Prescott." A collective gasp swept the room. Michael's head snapped up, his brows narrowing in surprise. Alex Prescott. The name meant nothing to him or to Emily, if her unflinching posture was any indication. But the mere fact that the prosecution had withheld this witness until now sent a ripple of tension through the defense table. The side door opened, and a man in his mid-30s stepped into the courtroom. He wore a tailored navy suit and carried himself with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to high-stakes environments. His dark hair was perfectly groomed, but his eyes betrayed a restless energy, darting briefly toward Emily before settling on the judge. The bailiff swore him in, and Dana approached the stand with the slow precision of a chess player revealing her final piece. "Mr. Prescott," Dana began, "please state your occupation for the record." "I'm a financial consultant," he said smoothly. "I worked closely with Parker and Cole on several major accounts. And during your time working with the firm," Dana continued, "did you have professional contact with the defendant, Emily Parker?" Alex's gaze flicked toward Emily, who returned it without expression. "Yes," he said after a brief pause. "We worked together on multiple high-value portfolios." Dana stepped closer, her voice sharpening. "Mr. Prescott, did Ms. Parker ever discuss transferring funds outside of approved channels?" The room fell silent. Reporters leaned forward, pens frozen above their notepads. Alex cleared his throat. "Yes," he said finally. "She approached me about creating temporary holding accounts to streamline large transfers. At first, I believed these were legitimate strategies for moving capital quickly. But over time, I realized these accounts were shell entities' vehicles for diverting money." A ripple of murmurs spread through the spectators. Michael's jaw tightened, but he remained seated, eyes fixed on the witness. Dana continued, "Can you provide specific examples of these discussions?" Alex nodded. "We met several times off-site coffee shops, private conference rooms." She explained that the transfers needed to appear routine. She even suggested using code words in our emails to avoid detection. Gasps filled the courtroom. A reporter dropped a pen, a small clatter echoing in the sudden hush. Michael finally rose. "Objection, Your Honor. This testimony is both prejudicial and unsupported by evidence." Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Whitmore, do you have corroborating documentation?" Dana's lips curved into a thin smile. "Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution has recently obtained a series of encrypted emails between Mr. Prescott and the defendant. With the court's permission, we will present them shortly." Michael's stomach sank. He had anticipated surprises, but not this. He turned to Emily, searching her face for any sign of panic. There was none. Her expression remained as serene as ever, though her eyes seemed to sharpen, as if measuring each unfolding move. The emails were displayed on the courtroom screens, a series of brief but suggestive messages. Phrases like route through Channel C and confirm shadow account glowed in cold black text. Donna highlighted each one, her voice crisp as she described their implications. "Mr. Prescott," she said, "are these the communications you exchanged with Ms. E. Parker?" "Yes," Alex replied firmly. The jury scribbled notes with renewed urgency. Even Judge Harrison leaned forward slightly, his normally impassive face tightening as he scanned the projected emails. Michael stood for cross-examination, his movements deliberate but edged with steel. "Mr. Prescott," he began, "you claim these emails were encrypted. How did the prosecution obtain them?" "They were recovered from a backup server at Parker & Cole," Alex said. Michael tilted his head. "Recovered by whom?" "The firm's IT department." "Interesting," Michael said softly. "Are you aware that Parker & Cole is currently under federal investigation for unrelated breaches of client data?" Dana objected, but Judge Harrison allowed the question. "I've heard rumors," Alex admitted. Michael nodded. "So it is possible these emails could have been tampered with during recovery?" Alex hesitated. "I suppose it's possible, but unlikely." Michael pressed on. "And these supposed off-site meetings, do you have photographs, receipts, or any physical proof that they took place?" "No, but thank you," Michael cut in smoothly. No further questions. The jurors exchanged uncertain looks. Donna's star witness had delivered a bombshell, but Michael's questions had planted seeds of doubt. When court recessed for lunch, the spectators erupted into a frenzy. Outside, reporters fired rapid updates into cameras, their voices breathless with excitement. Headlines exploded across social media. Mystery witness claims secret meetings with Parker. Inside the defense room, Michael paced while Emily sipped water, seemingly unfazed. "Emily," he said, lowering his voice, "is there anything you haven't told me about this man?" "No," she replied calmly. "I've never met Alex Prescott outside of professional meetings. Those emails are doctored." Michael studied her face. There was no tremor in her voice, no flicker of guilt. Only a quiet certainty that chilled him even as it steadied his resolve. When the court reconvened, Dana introduced a final piece of evidence. A financial report showing that one of the disputed transfers had been redirected through an account linked to an offshore firm. The account, she claimed, had been opened using an alias suspiciously similar to Emily's mother's maiden name. The jury stiffened at the revelation. Even Michael felt a jolt of concern. But Emily merely leaned toward him and whispered, "Ask about the time stone." Michael rose immediately. "Your Honor, before we proceed, the defense requests the metadata. For the offshore transfer specifically, the creation date of the account." Dana frowned, but produced the data. Michael scanned it quickly and smiled faintly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, addressing the jury, "this account was created 3 months after Miss Parker was suspended from her position. She had no access to the firm's internal systems at that time. Whoever opened this account did so when my client no longer held the authority to do so." A wave of murmurs swept the room. Judge Harrison leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Donna's jaw tightened as she realized the trap she had walked into. The afternoon session ended in chaos. Jurors whispered furiously among themselves. Reporters raced to rewrite their headlines. The prosecution's surprise witness, intended to crush the defense, had instead opened a new chasm of doubt. As the bailiff called for adjournment, Emily rose gracefully, smoothing the sleeves of her jacket. She turned to Michael with a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "They're playing someone else's game," she said quietly. Michael nodded slowly, feeling the truth of her words settle over him like a heavy fog. Whatever this trial had started, as it was now clear, Emily Parker was not simply defending herself. She was unearthing something far larger, something that had only begun to surface with the arrival of Alex Prescott. The fifth day of the trial began beneath a sky washed clean by overnight rain. Morning sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps, glinting off the lenses of dozens of cameras already trained on the entrance. Reporters spoke into microphones with a fervor that bordered on manic. Yesterday's surprise witness had turned the trial into a national obsession, and speculation about the coming testimony filled every headline. Inside, the courtroom thrummed with anticipation. Jurors filed in silently, their faces tight with exhaustion and curiosity. Judge Harrison entered with his usual deliberate pace, but his eyes betrayed the weight of the previous day's chaos. He tapped his gavel once, the sharp crack slicing through the low murmur of the crowd. "Court is now in session," the bailiff declared. Emily Parker walked in moments later, her stride steady, her chin held high. Despite the media frenzy outside, she looked composed, almost unnervingly so. She wore a navy suit today, the color deep and commanding, and her eyes swept the courtroom with the quiet authority of someone who refused to be diminished by circumstance. Michael Grant, her attorney, settled beside her, his leather briefcase brimming with notes. He glanced at his client, searching for any sign of strain. "You ready for this?" he whispered. "I've been ready," Emily replied softly. The tension thickened as the prosecution prepared to call its next witness. Dana Whitmore stood, her posture crisp and deliberate. Her face betrayed none of the frustration that had shadowed her after yesterday's missteps, but Michael recognized the subtle stiffness in her movements. The prosecution had suffered a blow with the metadata revelation. Today was her chance to recover. "Your Honor," Dana began, "the prosecution recalls Mr. Alex Prescott for further questioning." A ripple of surprise traveled through the gallery. Prescott had barely survived Michael's cross-examination the day before. Why risk putting him back on the stand? Alex Prescott entered with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. He looked more polished today, new suit, fresh shave, but the restless flicker in his gaze remained. The bailiff swore him in again, and Dana approached with a file clutched tightly in her hand. "Mr. Prescott," she began, "since yesterday's testimony, additional data has been reviewed. Do you still maintain that Miss Parker orchestrated unauthorized transfers?" "Yes," Alex said firmly. "The account creation date is irrelevant. She laid the groundwork long before she was suspended. The offshore firm was simply the final step in a plan she designed." Dana paced slowly before the jury box. "And to clarify, you allege that Ms. Parker instructed you to create shadow accounts and route funds through them." "Yes," Alex repeated, his voice sharper this time. "She was meticulous. Every detail was calculated." Michael rose calmly. "Objection, Your Honor. Speculation." "Sustained," Judge Harrison said, his gavel striking once. "Mr. Prescott, restrict your answers to facts." Alex nodded, but the damage was done. His words, meticulous, calculated, lingered in the air like smoke. Michael leaned toward Emily, speaking under his breath. "We need to break him." Emily didn't look away from the witness stand. "He's breaking himself," she murmured. Dana presented a series of financial charts, projected on the courtroom screens. Arrows and figures connected like a spider's web, tracing money flows through multiple shell entities. "These transfers," she said, "cannot be explained by ordinary business operations. They demonstrate intent that leads directly to the defendant." The jury watched intently, pens scratching furiously. From the outside, the charts looked damning. But Michael noticed small inconsistencies, transaction times that didn't align with bank operating hours, account numbers that appeared twice where they shouldn't. When it was finally his turn to cross-examine, Michael rose with deliberate calm. He began with small, seemingly innocuous questions about dates and times, carefully luring Prescott into a rhythm of confident answers. "Mr. Prescott," Michael said, his voice smooth as glass. "You claim that Miss Parker instructed you to create shadow accounts. Did you record any of these instructions?" "No." "Did you save any text messages verifying her approval?" "No." "Did you ever meet with her outside of work after she was suspended?" "No." Michael paused, letting the repetition sink in. "So your entire testimony relies on emails that could have been altered and meetings that cannot be independently verified?" Dana objected, but Judge Harrison allowed the question. "Yes," Prescott admitted, a flicker of irritation breaking through his polished exterior. "But I know what I heard." Michael tilted his head. "And yet, you provide no evidence beyond your own word, correct?" Alex's jaw tightened. "Correct." Michael smiled faintly. "Thank you." No further questions. The gallery erupted in whispers. Prescott's credibility, already shaky, had begun to fray. Even a few jurors exchanged skeptical glances. But the real turning point came unexpectedly. During a brief recess, Michael reviewed the financial charts on his tablet. Emily leaned over, her eyes scanning the web of numbers. "Look at this," she whispered, pointing to a cluster of transactions highlighted in red. These accounts were opened during the firm's security breach, the same breach under federal investigation. "They're using compromised data." Michael's eyes widened. "If we can prove that." "We don't need to prove it," Emily said quietly. "We just need to make the judge question it." When court reconvened, Michael requested access to the prosecution's source data for the charts, citing discrepancies. Dana objected furiously, but Judge Harrison granted the request, instructing both sides to review the information overnight. The prosecution's momentum faltered. Jurors whispered among themselves, exchanging uneasy looks. The once seamless narrative was beginning to unravel. During a short recess, Emily leaned toward Michael and spoke so softly he barely heard her. "It's time." "Time for what?" "To speak," she said. "I want to address the court." Michael hesitated. Up to now, they had agreed that Emily would remain silent, letting the evidence or lack thereof speak for her. "Are you sure?" he asked, lowering his voice. "You don't have to do this." "I do," Emily said firmly. "They need to hear it from me." "But not everything just enough." Michael studied her face. There was no fear, only a quiet certainty that unsettled him, even as it gave him strength. He nodded once. "All right. When the moment comes, I'll make the request." The afternoon dragged on with procedural arguments, but the tension in the room continued to mount. Everyone sensed that something was building, something beyond the day's testimony. Finally, as the prosecution attempted to reintroduce a set of disputed emails, Michael rose. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady, but carrying an unmistakable undercurrent of urgency. "The defense requests that the defendant be allowed to make a brief statement to the court." Judge Harrison's brow furrowed. "This is highly unusual at this stage of the proceedings." "Unusual," Michael agreed, "but necessary. My client has remained silent throughout this trial, but the integrity of these proceedings demands her voice, if only for a moment." The judge studied Emily for a long, heavy beat. At last, he nodded. "Very well, Miss Parker, you may address the court, briefly." A hush fell over the room as Emily rose. Every eye followed her as she stepped to the center of the courtroom. Her movements were deliberate, almost regal. For a moment, she said nothing, letting the silence stretch until even the clicking of cameras ceased. Then, in a voice calm but resonant, she spoke. "Check fingerprints." 2 words. That was all. The effect was instantaneous. Judge Harrison froze mid-note, his pen hovering above the legal pad. Dana Whitmore stiffened, confusion flashing across her face. The jurors exchanged startled glances. A low murmur rippled through the spectators, building into a buzz of speculation. Emily offered no further explanation. She simply returned to her seat, her face serene, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Judge Harrison leaned forward. "Ms. Whitmore," he said sharply, "has the prosecution conducted forensic analysis on the physical evidence?" Dana hesitated, clearly caught off guard. The initial analysis focused on document content, not latent prints. The judge's eyes hardened. "Then I am ordering an immediate recess. All physical evidence is to be reviewed for fingerprints before we proceed." He struck his gavel with a force that echoed through the chamber, signaling the abrupt end of the day's session. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Jurors looked stunned. The prosecution team whispered frantically, papers rustling like dry leaves in a sudden wind. Emily simply sat back in her chair, her eyes fixed on the judge, her expression unreadable. For the first time since the trial began, the balance of power had shifted unmistakably in her favor. 2 words, quiet, precise, devastating, had cracked the foundation of the prosecution's case. And for everyone in that courtroom, one question now burned hotter than any accusation. What would the fingerprints reveal? The courthouse corridors pulsed with chaos after Judge Harrison's sudden recess. Reporters flooded the marble halls, their frantic voices bouncing off the high ceilings as they raced to broadcast the newest development. Check fingerprints. 2 words had brought a trial watched by millions to a grinding halt. No one knew exactly what Emily Parker meant, but everyone understood one thing. Something critical had been overlooked. Emily remained in the defense conference room, shielded from the media frenzy by 2 bailiffs and a locked oak door. Inside, the air was calmer, but no less electric. Michael Grant set down a folder, exhaling a slow, deliberate breath. "You realize," he said, "you've just forced the judge's hand. He's ordering a full forensic sweep of every physical document and object tied to this case. Do you know what they might find?" Emily's gaze held his, steady and unwavering. "Yes," she said simply. Michael leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Emily, I need to know everything. If there's something you've been holding back—" "There isn't," she interrupted gently. "The truth is in the evidence. They just haven't bothered to look for it." Michael studied her for a long moment, reading the quiet certainty in her face. "And the fingerprints? They'll show whose hands were really on those documents," Emily replied. "And it wasn't mine." Outside the room, the courthouse had become a pressure cooker. Journalists speculated wildly on live broadcasts. Analysts dissected every syllable of Emily's statement, and social media boiled with theories. Some insisted her words were a desperate gamble. Others believed she had just detonated the prosecution's case. Meanwhile, Judge Harrison convened an emergency meeting with both legal teams. His gravelly voice carried the weight of authority as he issued his order. Every document, envelope, and hard drive submitted as evidence will undergo full latent print analysis tonight. Court will reconvene at 9 a.m. tomorrow. No exceptions. Dana Whitmore, the prosecutor, tried to protest. "Your Honor, such a review will delay proceedings." "Counselor," Harrison interrupted, his tone brooking no argument, "your office presented these materials. If the defendant suggests a reasonable means of verifying their integrity, we will verify it." The gavel struck once more, sealing the decision. By early evening, the evidence lab on the courthouse's lower level buzzed with technicians in white gloves and sterile masks. Boxes of exhibits, financial statements, email printouts, account contracts were laid out under harsh fluorescent lights. Each item was carefully dusted, photographed, and scanned. The faint smell of fingerprint powder mixed with the sterile scent of cleaning agents. Upstairs, Emily sat with Michael in the empty courtroom, waiting for updates. The polished wood pews, so often packed with spectators, now sat eerily silent. The silence stretched until Michael finally broke it. "You've been calm through this entire storm," he said quietly. "Even today, most people in your position would be terrified. Emily folded her hands. Fear doesn't change facts. If you know the truth, panic is just noise. Michael gave a wry smile. I wish all my clients felt that way. Hours crawled by. Occasionally, a technician emerged from the lab carrying sealed envelopes, heading toward the judge's chambers. Each time the door opened, Michael felt a jolt of adrenaline, but Emily remained composed, her eyes distant, as though already envisioning the outcome. Shortly before midnight, Judge Harrison summoned both teams to a closed-door briefing. The weary judge sat behind his desk, flanked by two forensic experts in lab coats. Their expressions were grave, but charged with significance. Ladies and gentlemen, Harrison began. The initial results of the fingerprint analysis are in. Several key exhibits, most notably the offshore account documents, bear latent prints that do not match the defendant. Dana Whitmore stiffened. Then whose prints do they match? The lead technician stepped forward, holding a tablet. Our preliminary comparison shows strong consistency with Alex Prescott. A stunned silence followed. Michael felt his chest tighten with vindication. Emily merely inclined her head, as though confirming what she had known all along. Dana quickly recovered. Preliminary doesn't mean definitive, she said sharply. Could these prints have been transferred inadvertently? Cross-contamination, perhaps? The technician shook her head. The prints are clear and direct. They indicate handling during the creation of these documents, not casual contact. Judge Harrison turned to Dana. Counselor, can your office provide an explanation? Dana opened her mouth, then closed it again, the usual fire in her eyes dimmed by dawning realization. Not at this time, Your Honor. Harrison leaned back in his chair, his voice heavy with authority. The court will require a full written report by morning. Until then, this trial remains in recess. Michael and Emily stepped into the hallway, where the echo of their footsteps mingled with the distant hum of reporters still camped outside. Michael exhaled a long breath of disbelief. Emily, you just turned the entire case upside down. Emily allowed herself a small smile. Not me, she said. The truth did. By the time the courthouse reopened the next morning, the city outside was alive with speculation. News vans lined the street for blocks, and early risers clutched steaming cups of coffee as they jostled for position near the courthouse doors. Headlines blared across televisions and phones. Fingerprints shake prosecution case. Inside, the courtroom felt different charged, yes, but now the current ran in Emily's favor. The jurors entered looking alert, even skeptical, their pens poised, but their eyes sharper than before. Dana Whitmore appeared composed, but the slight tremor in her hands betrayed the pressure she was under. Judge Harrison wasted no time. Before we proceed, he began, the court has reviewed the forensic report. It confirms that multiple key documents contain fingerprints belonging to witness Alex Prescott, and no prints belonging to the defendant. A collective gasp swept the gallery. Cameras clicked furiously. Dana rose, attempting to salvage ground. Your Honor, the presence of Mr. Prescott's fingerprints does not exonerate the defendant. It merely indicates he handled the documents. Michael was ready. Handled them during their creation, he countered. Creation which the prosecution alleged was the sole work of my client. These results directly contradict your theory of the case. Judge Harrison fixed Dana with a piercing look. Counselor, the integrity of this evidence is now in question. You will explain why this witness, your key witness, handled documents he claimed were solely prepared by the defendant. Dana's lips tightened, but she offered no immediate reply. Meanwhile, Alex Prescott sat rigid in the gallery, his confident posture from earlier days replaced by a taut, nervous stiffness. His eyes darted from the judge to the jury to Emily, whose calm gaze met his like a quiet challenge. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens flying across notepads. Social media exploded with real-time updates. Emily Parker, who had been painted as a cold and calculating fraudster, now looked more like the target of a calculated trap. The judge called for a brief recess to allow the prosecution to review its position. As the bailiff announced the break, the gallery erupted into a storm of whispers. Michael turned to Emily, his voice low. "This is it. They can't hide behind speculation anymore." Emily allowed herself a small, measured breath. "Truth leaves fingerprints," she said softly. Michael looked at her, realizing the depth of her quiet resolve. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" "I trusted that it would," Emily replied. "Sometimes the smallest evidence speaks the loudest." Across the aisle, Donna conferred urgently with her team. Alex Prescott sat apart, staring at the floor, his jaw clenched tight. Whatever secrets he had hoped to bury were rising to the surface, dragged into the light by the very evidence he thought would destroy Emily. The balance of the trial had shifted irreversibly. Emily's 2 words spoken with calm precision had not only stopped the proceedings but had begun to reveal a hidden conspiracy. And as Judge Harrison prepared to reconvene, everyone in the courtroom understood that the next session would not just determine Emily Parker's innocence. It would expose the true architect of the entire scheme. Morning sunlight slanted through the tall windows of the courthouse, painting pale stripes across the polished wooden floor. But inside the courtroom, the air felt thick and electric. Everyone present, jurors, reporters, lawyers, spectators, knew that what was about to unfold could decide not only Emily Parker's fate, but also the credibility of the entire prosecution team. Judge Harrison entered with deliberate gravity, his black robe trailing behind him like a shadow. The murmurs died instantly. He settled into his seat and looked over his glasses at the 2 legal teams. "This court has reviewed the full forensic report," he began. "The analysis confirms that multiple key exhibits, including the offshore account documents and transfer requests, contain fingerprints belonging to witness Alex Prescott. No fingerprints belonging to the defendant, Emily Parker, were found on those items. Ms. Whitmore," he said, turning his piercing gaze toward the prosecutor, "the burden now falls to your office to explain this glaring inconsistency." Dana Whitmore, who had been a model of composure throughout the trial, rose slowly. The slightest tremor passed through her hand as she gathered her notes. "Your Honor, while we acknowledge the results of the forensic analysis, we maintain that these findings do not negate the circumstantial evidence against the defendant. Fingerprints alone do not." Judge Harrison raised a hand, cutting her off. "Counselor, circumstantial evidence cannot outweigh physical evidence when it directly contradicts her narrative. This court will not proceed on speculation alone. You will address how your key witness's prints came to be on documents he claimed were created and controlled by the defendant." Dana's jaw tightened. "We are conducting an internal review to determine the chain of custody. That review," the judge interrupted, "should have been conducted before these materials were presented in open court." He turned to Michael Grant. "Mr. Grant, you may proceed with cross-examination of the witness." Michael stood, buttoning his suit jacket with calm precision. The defense had waited for this moment, and the entire courtroom sensed it. "Mr. Prescott," Michael began, his voice smooth but edged with quiet force, "you testified earlier that Ms. Parker orchestrated the creation of these offshore accounts." "Yes," Alex said stiffly. "And you swore under oath that you merely observed her actions, correct?" "Yes." Michael stepped closer to the witness stand, his eyes never leaving Prescott's. "Then how do you explain the presence of your fingerprints on the very documents you claim she created?" A hush fell over the courtroom. Prescott shifted in his chair, his carefully polished demeanor beginning to crack. "I handled them later," he said finally. "Ms. Parker asked me to deliver them to a third party. That's when my fingerprints were left." Michael tilted his head. "Interesting. Earlier, you testified that you had no contact with these documents outside of your alleged meetings with Miss Parker. Do you recall that testimony? Prescott hesitated. Yes. But, Your Honor, Michael said sharply, I request that yesterday's transcript be read back to the witness, specifically his statement regarding handling of the documents. The court reporter quickly located the passage and read it aloud. I never handled the final documents myself. They were exclusively managed by Emily Parker. Michael turned back to Prescott. Care to explain the discrepancy, Mr. Prescott? Sweat began to bead at Alex's temple. I misspoke yesterday. Michael's voice hardened. Or perhaps you lied under oath. Dana leapt to her feet. Objection. Counsel is badgering the witness. Overruled, Judge Harrison said immediately, his tone cold. The witness will answer the question. Prescott swallowed hard. I was confused about the timeline. Michael leaned in slightly, lowering his voice to a near whisper that carried through the hushed courtroom. Confused or caught? The words hung in the air like a blade. Prescott's eyes darted toward the prosecution table, where Dana sat rigid, her expression carefully blank. Michael straightened and continued. Mr. Prescott, are you aware that the creation date of the offshore account predates any alleged meeting with Miss Parker? Prescott's mouth opened, but no words emerged. Yes or no, Mr. Prescott? Yes, he admitted finally, his voice barely audible. A ripple of shock traveled through the courtroom. Several jurors exchanged wide-eyed glances. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens scratching across notepads. Michael pressed the advantage. And are you aware that internal security logs show your employee access card was used to retrieve these documents from Parker and Cole's archives on the night they were allegedly drafted? Prescott's shoulders slumped. I can't explain that. Michael allowed a beat of silence to stretch before delivering the final blow. Perhaps the explanation is simple. You created those documents yourself, didn't you? Objection. Dana barked. But before Judge Harrison could respond, Prescott blurted out, I was told to do it. The courtroom erupted in a storm of gasps and whispers. The judge's gavel hammered for order. Mr. Prescott, he said sharply, you will explain who instructed you to falsify evidence. Prescott hesitated, his eyes flicking again toward the prosecution table. I can't, he said finally, his voice breaking. Judge Harrison's eyes narrowed. You are under oath. Failure to answer may result in a charge of contempt of court. Alex clenched his fists, his face pale. It wasn't Emily, he said hoarsely. That's all I can say. The judge leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. You will reveal the name, Mr. Prescott, or I will hold you in contempt. Prescott stared down at the wooden witness stand, his jaw trembling. After a long, tense silence, he whispered, It came from inside the firm. Someone higher up. Someone who wanted her gone. The gallery erupted once again, the noise swelling until the judge's gavel cracked like a gunshot. Order! Harrison barked. Michael seized the opening. Your Honor, in light of this testimony, the defense moves to dismiss all charges against Miss Parker immediately and requests that Mr. Prescott be held for questioning regarding perjury and obstruction of justice. Dana shot to her feet. Your Honor, the prosecution needs time to... Request denied, Harrison said sharply. This trial cannot continue on tainted evidence. The motion to dismiss is granted. Miss Parker, you are free to go. For a heartbeat, the courtroom froze. Then the gallery exploded in a storm of voices, reporters rushing for the exits, spectators gasping, jurors exchanging incredulous glances. Emily remained perfectly still. Slowly, she turned to Michael, her eyes calm but shining with the faintest glimmer of triumph. It's over, Michael said quietly, almost to himself. No, Emily replied softly. It's just beginning. As deputies escorted Prescott from the witness stand, his shoulders hunched in defeat, Reporters shouted questions that went unanswered. Dana Whitmore gathered her files with stiff movements. Her once commanding presence diminished to a shadow of frustration and humiliation. Emily rose, smoothing the sleeves of her suit. The courtroom's chaos seemed to part around her as she walked toward the exit, each step deliberate and unhurried. The cameras flashed wildly, capturing the image of a woman who had entered the courthouse branded as a criminal and was now leaving as something entirely different. A survivor, a truth-bearer, and perhaps the key to exposing a conspiracy that reached far beyond a single trial. Outside, the morning sun felt warmer than it had in weeks. The crowd surged forward, shouting questions, but Emily paused only long enough to look up at the courthouse behind her. For a moment, she allowed herself a single steady breath. The battle inside was over, but she knew the war for the truth was not. Prescott's half-confession hinted at powerful forces still hidden in the shadows. Someone inside Parker and Cole had orchestrated this betrayal, and they would not surrender quietly. As Michael joined her on the courthouse steps, he whispered, "You know they'll come after you again." Emily's eyes remained fixed on the horizon. "Then we'll be ready." The cameras clicked, capturing her calm silhouette against the rising sun. Across the nation, viewers watched in stunned silence, knowing instinctively that this was not the end of Emily Parker's story. It was the opening move in a far larger game, one she had just proven she was more than capable of winning. The courthouse had emptied hours ago, but the echo of that morning's shocking dismissal still pulsed across the country. News anchors replayed the scene on endless loops. Emily Parker stepping calmly into the sunlight, her quiet strength defying the chaos behind her. Across every television screen, headlines screamed, "Trial collapses after fingerprint bombshell, key witness implicated." Emily sat in a quiet corner of a downtown cafe, her phone buzzing with messages she refused to answer. Michael Grant, her attorney and steadfast ally, slid into the seat across from her, carrying a steaming cup of black coffee. His face bore the exhaustion of a man who had just fought a war in open court. "They're already talking about a federal investigation," Michael said, his voice low. "Prescott's in custody. He's cracking, but not fast enough. He keeps hinting at someone higher up in Parker, and Cole, someone who gave the order to frame you. The FBI wants to meet with us tomorrow." Emily stirred her tea with slow, deliberate motions. "He's still protecting whoever it is," she murmured. "That means they're powerful. Powerful enough to ruin me, and maybe powerful enough to try again." Michael leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "We'll protect you, and we'll find them. Whoever set this in motion underestimated you once. They won't get another chance." But Emily wasn't reassured. She had spent months enduring whispers, betrayals, and courtroom ambushes. Whoever orchestrated this scheme hadn't just wanted her discredited, they'd wanted her destroyed. That kind of hatred didn't simply fade because a judge dismissed a case. The next morning, Emily and Michael entered the federal building, where a team of investigators awaited them in a sterile conference room. Special Agent Karen Whitfield, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for unraveling corporate crimes, greeted them with a firm handshake. "Miss Parker, Mr. Grant," Agent Whitfield said, motioning to the chairs across from her. "First, let me say that what you did in court, those two words, may have saved your life." Emily raised an eyebrow. "My life?" Whitfield nodded grimly. "We believe this wasn't just about money. The documents Prescott produced were designed to tie you to international fraud. If we hadn't caught the inconsistencies, you could have faced federal charges that carry decades in prison. Someone wanted you gone for good." Michael's jaw tightened. "Do you have any leads on who that someone might be?" Whitfield tapped a folder in front of her. "Prescott is talking, slowly. He claims a senior partner at Parker, and Cole, someone with deep political connections, ordered the setup. But he's terrified. He won't name names until he has protection. Emily's stomach tightened. Parker and Cole had once been her professional home, a place she'd poured her heart and soul into. She'd built friendships there, trusted mentors. The thought that one of them might have orchestrated her downfall felt like a physical blow. "Can we trust Prescott?" Emily asked quietly. "His story checks out so far," Whitfield said. "The fingerprints, the access logs, the financial traces, they all lead back to the firm. Whoever gave the order covered their tracks, but not perfectly. We're closing in." Emily exchanged a glance with Michael. "Then we help him," she said firmly. "If protecting Prescott means exposing the truth, I'll stand with him even after what he did to me." Whitfield studied her for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "That kind of courage is rare. But be careful, Miss Parker. People like this don't back down easily." That evening, Emily returned to her apartment to find a plain envelope slipped under her door. No return address. Her pulse quickened as she picked it up. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "Stop digging or next time the court won't save you." Her breath caught. The letters were stark, cold, and unsigned. Whoever had sent it knew where she lived and wanted her to know it. Michael arrived minutes later, summoned by a single frantic call. He examined the note with narrowed eyes. "They're desperate," he said. "This is a threat, but it's also a mistake. We'll give it to the FBI. Every move they make leaves a trace." Emily held the paper tightly. Fear prickled at the edges of her resolve, but anger burned brighter. Whoever had done this had already stolen months of her life, poisoned her reputation, and dragged her through the mud. She would not let them win by intimidation. The next day, Emily and Michael sat once again in the federal building as Prescott entered under heavy guard. He looked thinner, his usual smugness replaced by wary resignation. "I want protection," he said immediately, eyes darting to the mirrored walls. "Witness protection. Full immunity." Whitfield folded her arms. "You'll get protection if your information holds up. But immunity? That depends on the U.S. attorney. Start talking." Prescott licked his lips nervously. "It was Richard Cole," he said finally, the name landing like a thunderclap. "Senior partner." Emily was threatening to expose a series of illegal offshore accounts he'd set up for high-profile clients. He thought she was getting too close, so he ordered me to frame her. He said if I didn't, he'd ruin me too. Emily's heart clenched. Richard Cole, her former mentor, the man who had once championed her career, was the one who had betrayed her. Memories of late-night strategy sessions and words of encouragement twisted into a sickening mockery. Whitfield remained impassive, but her eyes sharpened. "Do you have proof?" Prescott nodded quickly. "Encrypted emails. Transaction records. He kept backups in a private server. I can give you access codes." Whitfield stood, her voice steady but urgent. "Then we have what we need. Mr. Prescott, you'll be taken into protective custody immediately. Miss Parker, this information changes everything. We're issuing a federal warrant for Richard Cole's arrest." Emily exhaled slowly, her fists tightening in her lap. Justice was finally within reach. The news broke within hours. Senior partner of Parker and Cole indicted in massive fraud scheme. Across the nation, people who had once doubted Emily now watched in stunned silence as Richard Cole was led away in handcuffs. Cameras captured his expression defiant yet hollow as federal agents escorted him into a waiting car. Outside her apartment, reporters crowded the sidewalk, eager for a statement. Emily stepped forward, flanked by Michael and Agent Whitfield. Microphones thrust toward her, voices overlapping in a storm of questions. "Miss Parker, how do you feel now that the truth is out?" Emily paused, her eyes steady. "Relieved," she said finally. "But this isn't just about me. This is about a system that allowed someone powerful to manipulate the law for personal gain. I'm grateful to the court, to the investigators, and to everyone who refused to let fear win. Justice doesn't always come quickly, but it comes. Her words rippled through the crowd, carried live across national broadcasts. Viewers watched not just a woman exonerated, but a survivor who had turned her ordeal into a message of courage and accountability. Later that night, Emily stood on her apartment balcony, gazing at the city lights below. The trial was over, the conspiracy exposed. But she knew this was only the beginning of a larger fight. People like Richard Cole didn't operate in isolation. There were more secrets hidden in the shadows, more victims waiting for the truth to set them free. Michael joined her, leaning on the railing beside her. "You could walk away now," he said softly. "You've cleared your name. You don't owe anyone anything." Emily's eyes never left the skyline. "I can't," she said. "If they did this to me, they've done it to others. Someone has to make sure they can't do it again." Michael gave a small, approving smile. "Then we start tomorrow." The city hummed beneath them, alive with possibility. Emily Parker, once a silent defendant on the brink of ruin, had become something far more powerful. A beacon of truth in a world too often clouded by lies. And though her words in court had been few, their echo-check fingerprints would continue to reverberate across courtrooms, boardrooms, and hearts for years to come. Because sometimes, the smallest voice can reveal the biggest secret. And sometimes, two simple words can change everything.